What happens when a billionaire CEO walks into his own company, unrecognized, and sees the real face of his business? This is the extraordinary story of Jonathan Reynolds, a self-made business tycoon who built a retail empire from the ground up. But when he decided to go undercover as an ordinary customer, what he discovered left him in shock. Hey everyone! Welcome back to Ever After Stories. Today, I have a heartfelt story to share with you. Get ready to feel all the emotions. Jonathan Reynolds was a name that commanded respect in the corporate world. From a small clothing store to a billion-dollar retail chain, he had built Reynolds Fashion into a household name. His leadership style was admired, his business strategies were studied in universities, and his wealth was envied by many. Yet, Jonathan never forgot his humble beginnings. He had started as a simple store clerk, working long hours and dealing with demanding customers. He believed in customer service above all else, treating every person who walked into his stores with respect and care. His philosophy was simple: a business thrives when its customers are valued. But was this philosophy still alive in his company? Jonathan had been receiving reports, emails from frustrated customers, whispers from industry insiders, and even online reviews, all pointing to one thing: poor customer service in his own stores. At first, he dismissed them. A few bad experiences don't define an entire company, he told himself. But when complaints kept increasing, he knew he had to take action. Instead of relying on managers' reports or surveillance footage, Jonathan decided to experience the service firsthand. He would go undercover, without cameras, without assistance, and without warning. A skilled makeup artist transformed him into an average middle-aged man, complete with wrinkles, a fake beard, and second-hand clothes. His designer watch and expensive suit were replaced with a budget jacket and worn-out sneakers. He looked nothing like the powerful CEO he truly was. His plan was simple: walk into one of his flagship stores as a customer and observe how he was treated. Would his employees uphold the values he had built his empire on? Or had his company lost its way? With his heart pounding, Jonathan stepped through the glass doors of one of his busiest stores. What he found next would shake him to the core. Jonathan took a deep breath as he entered the brightly lit store. Rows of stylish clothing lined the racks, and large promotional posters hung from the ceiling, showcasing the latest collections. The store had everything a customer could want, except, as he would soon find out, good customer service. He glanced around, expecting to be greeted by an employee, but no one even looked his way. A few sales associates stood by the register, chatting amongst themselves. Others were busy folding clothes, seemingly uninterested in the customers browsing through the store. Jonathan picked up a jacket from a display table and examined it. Still, no one approached him. He wandered deeper into the store, deliberately looking confused. Surely, someone would offer to help. Minutes passed. Nothing. A young employee walked by, eyes locked on her phone. Jonathan cleared his throat and spoke softly. "Excuse me, can you help me find this jacket in a different size?" The employee barely glanced at him. With an annoyed sigh, she muttered, "If it's not on the rack, we don't have it." Then, without another word, she walked away. Jonathan stood frozen. Did she really just brush off a customer like that? He decided to try again. He approached another employee, a man in his mid-20s who was busy arranging clothes. "Excuse me, I have a question about this fabric." The employee gave him a quick glance and replied, "Check the tag." Jonathan felt a surge of disappointment. Was this how customers were being treated in his own store? Determined to test the service further, he walked up to the register where two employees stood chatting. He waited patiently as they laughed at a joke. Seconds turned into an uncomfortable silence. They both saw him standing there, but neither acknowledged him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I'd like to make a purchase." One of the cashiers rolled her eyes and slowly turned to the register. "You finding everything okay?" she asked in a flat, disinterested tone. Jonathan's heart sank. There was no warmth, no professionalism, no care. As he left the store, a realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His company, the one he had built with passion and dedication, was failing where it mattered most. Something had to change. Jonathan stepped out of the store, his mind racing. He had built Reynolds Fashion with the belief that great customer service was the foundation of success. Yet, his employees had ignored him, dismissed his questions, and treated him as if he were a burden rather than a valued customer. He had expected minor flaws, perhaps a slow response or a slightly indifferent employee. But what he experienced was far worse. It wasn't just one or two bad employees. It was an entire culture of neglect. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching as other customers entered and left the store. Were they receiving the same cold treatment? Had this become the standard in his business? Jonathan wasn't going to make decisions based on just one visit. He needed to see if this behavior was widespread. Over the next week, he visited 5 different Reynolds Fashion stores across the city, always in disguise, always as an ordinary customer. The results were alarming. Store 1. He asked for help finding a suit jacket. The employee pointed vaguely to a corner and said, "Over there somewhere." Store 2. The staff was more engaged with each other, not the customers. They gossiped, laughed, and ignored shoppers unless directly confronted. Store 3. The cashier didn't make eye contact or say a single word except card or cash. Store 4. An employee told him she was too busy to check if an item was in stock. Store 5. A security guard was friendlier than any of the sales associates. It was a disaster. This wasn't an isolated issue. This was a company-wide problem. Jonathan needed to know why this was happening. His employees weren't lazy, at least, they hadn't been when they were hired. So what had changed? He arranged a private meeting with a former store manager, someone who had worked at Reynolds Fashion for years before resigning. Over coffee, Jonathan, still in disguise, asked him about the work culture. The ex-manager sighed. Honestly, things started going downhill when upper management became disconnected from the stores. Employees don't feel valued. There's no real training anymore, and there's no motivation to do better. Jonathan frowned. What about the current managers? Don't they encourage good service? The man laughed bitterly. Most of them only care about sales numbers. They don't care how employees act as long as the store hits targets. Jonathan felt a pit in his stomach. Had he unknowingly allowed this toxic culture to grow under his leadership? He thanked the ex-manager for his time and left with a newfound determination. This was his company, and he wasn't going to let it crumble. It was time for a reckoning. Jonathan had seen enough. His company was broken at its core, and the worst part? No one at the top even realized it. As he sat in his office, still disguised as the average customer, he reflected on what he had learned. The problem wasn't just bad employees, it was a leadership failure. Somewhere along the way, the values that had built Reynolds Fashion had been lost. But before making drastic changes, he needed to understand one more thing. How did his top managers allow this to happen? Still in disguise, Jonathan scheduled a meeting with 3 regional managers who oversaw multiple stores. He posed as a business consultant, claiming to be conducting research on customer service. The managers greeted him politely, but it didn't take long for their real attitudes to show. Customer service? One of them scoffed. Customers these days don't care about that. They just want discounts and fast checkout. Another nodded. Exactly. Sales are what matter. We track revenue, not how many times an employee smiles at a customer. Jonathan clenched his jaw. But what about building relationships with customers? Ensuring they feel valued? One of the managers shrugged. Look, as long as the stores meet their monthly targets, HQ is happy. If an employee is rude here and there, it's not the end of the world. There it was, the problem had started from the top. These managers weren't pushing for good service because they weren't being held accountable for it. They cared only about the numbers on their spreadsheets, not the people keeping the business alive. Jonathan had heard enough. The disguise, the secret investigations, it was time to reveal the truth. He stood up, slowly removing his fake beard and glasses. The room fell silent. The manager's eyes widened in horror as they recognized him. "I am Jonathan Reynolds," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And I just spent the last week being ignored, dismissed, and mistreated in my own stores." No one spoke. He leaned forward. "I built this company on the foundation of customer service. But you, all of you, have let it rot from the inside." One of the managers stammered, Sir, we had no idea. That's the problem, Jonathan interrupted. You had no idea because you never bothered to look? A heavy silence filled the room. Jonathan took a deep breath. This company is about to change. And if you don't like it, you're free to leave. He had seen enough. It was time to rebuild Reynolds' fashion from the ground up. The meeting room remained silent. The regional managers looked at each other, uncertainty written across their faces. Jonathan could feel the weight of their shock, but he had no time for excuses. This wasn't just about a failing system, it was about fixing the very foundation of his company. He straightened his posture. This is what's going to happen, he said, his voice firm. From this moment forward, customer service will be our top priority. Not just sales figures, not just efficiency, but how we treat people. One of the managers, still visibly shaken, cleared his throat. Sir, I understand your concern, but changing the entire company's approach will take time. The employees are used to the current system. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Then we'll retrain them. Every single employee, from the floor staff to the managers. If they don't adapt, they don't belong here. That night, Jonathan worked tirelessly with his most trusted executives to create a new customer service initiative. The strategy focused on 3 major changes. A complete training overhaul. Every employee, from cashiers to managers, would undergo mandatory customer service training. They would be taught how to engage with customers, how to handle complaints, and most importantly, how to care. Mystery shopper evaluations. Jonathan himself had gone undercover, but now, professional mystery shoppers would visit stores regularly. Their reports would determine bonuses and promotions, not just sales numbers. A leadership reset. Any manager who failed to prioritize customer experience would be replaced. No more ignoring customers, no more toxic leadership. The company would no longer tolerate indifference. By the end of the week, Jonathan sent an internal memo to all Reynolds fashion employees. It was short but powerful. Starting today, we return to our core values: respect, service, excellence. We are rebuilding this company for the better. If you're not willing to be part of that change, this is your chance to walk away. It was time to see who was truly committed to the future of Reynolds fashion. Jonathan knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. Rebuilding a company's culture was harder than building the company itself. Some employees would resist, some would leave, and some would fight back. But he was prepared for it. The day after the memo was sent, resignations started coming in. Several store managers and employees walked away, unwilling to adapt to the new customer-first approach. Some even complained that Jonathan was overreacting and that the company was fine the way it was. He let them go. If they couldn't see the problem, they were part of it. At the same time, other employees, ones who had always wanted to do better but had been held back by poor leadership, stepped up. One store associate sent an email. Mr. Reynolds, I've worked here for 3 years, and I've always believed we could do better. Thank you for giving us a real chance to improve. That email reminded Jonathan why he was doing this. There were still good people in his company, people who cared about customers, who wanted to be proud of their workplace. He wasn't just fixing a business, he was giving them the opportunity to thrive. The next step was retraining. Every single store closed for 2 days to allow employees to undergo intensive customer service training. Jonathan personally attended some of these sessions, sharing his own experience undercover. He made it clear, I was ignored. I was treated like I didn't matter. If that's how we treat customers, we will not survive. Employees were taught how to greet customers, how to assist them properly, and how to handle complaints professionally. Not everyone took the training seriously. Jonathan received reports that a few employees dismissed it as corporate nonsense. He fired them on the spot. The message was clear. Customer service wasn't optional. After weeks of intense changes, something remarkable started happening. Mystery shoppers reported a massive improvement in customer interactions. Employees were engaging, helpful, and professional. Customers began leaving positive reviews online, praising the improved service. Sales started increasing, proving that happy customers were returning customers. Jonathan had turned the tide. But the real test was yet to come. Would these changes last? Or would his company fall back into old habits once the pressure was off? The final test was about to begin. Jonathan had seen the numbers. Customer satisfaction was rising, sales were improving, and store employees seemed more engaged. But he wasn't convinced yet. Change often fades when people think no one is watching. Would his employees still uphold the new standards when they believed the pressure was off? There was only one way to find out. Jonathan decided to disguise himself once more. This time, he picked a different city, one of his busiest locations. He didn't tell anyone. No secret evaluations, no cameras. Just him, walking into the store like any other customer. The moment he entered, he braced himself. Would he be ignored again? Would the employees go back to their old habits? But this time, something was different. The moment he stepped inside, a young sales associate greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome to Reynolds Fashion. Let me know if I can help you find anything." Jonathan nodded, pretending to browse. A few minutes later, another employee approached him. "Looking for something specific? I'd be happy to help." The kindness wasn't forced, it was genuine. Employees were engaging with customers, offering assistance, and making sure people felt valued. Jonathan tested them further. He asked difficult questions, pretended to be confused, even acted frustrated, but instead of being ignored or dismissed, he was met with patience and professionalism. He felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. His employees had learned. They had changed. Before leaving, Jonathan bought a jacket, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to complete the experience. At the register, the cashier smiled as she handed him his bag. "Thank you for shopping with us. We really appreciate you." Jonathan looked at her for a moment and smiled back. "I appreciate you too." Walking out of the store, he finally let himself believe it. Reynolds Fashion was back. The business he had built, the one he had almost lost, was thriving again. And this time, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about people. Jonathan had always believed that businesses thrived on values, not just profits. But after witnessing firsthand how his company had drifted away from its core principles, he understood something even deeper. Leadership isn't about creating policies from the top. It's about being present, listening, and holding people accountable. The transformation of Reynolds Fashion was real. The culture had changed and customers were noticing. But Jonathan wanted to do more than just fix his own company. He wanted to send a message to the entire business world. For years, Jonathan had rarely given personal interviews. He let his company's success speak for itself. But this time, he knew he had to share his experience. He arranged for an exclusive interview with one of the largest business networks. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist, sat across from him in a sleek studio. Cameras rolled. Millions of viewers tuned in. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "there have been rumors that you recently went undercover in your own stores. Can you confirm this?" Jonathan nodded. "Not only can I confirm it, I can tell you it changed the way I see my own company." The interviewer leaned in, intrigued. "What did you find?" Jonathan took a deep breath. "I found neglect. I found employees who didn't care. I found managers who prioritized numbers over people. And worst of all, I found that my own leadership had allowed it to happen." The audience was silent. Even the interviewer seemed momentarily taken aback. "So what did you do?" she asked. "I made a decision," Jonathan said firmly. Either this company was going to change, or I was going to tear it down and rebuild it from scratch. He explained everything, from the shocking mistreatment he faced as a customer to the company-wide overhaul he implemented. When he finished, the interviewer smiled. It's rare for a CEO to admit failure, let alone take such drastic action. What do you want other business leaders to learn from your experience? Jonathan looked directly into the camera. Never assume your company is running the way you think it is. Get out of your office. Go to the ground level. See for yourself. Because if you don't, you might be building an empire that's already crumbling. The interview went viral. Business leaders across industries started questioning their own companies. Customers praised Jonathan for his honesty. Reynolds Fashion's reputation soared. But for Jonathan, this wasn't about publicity. It was about doing what was right. His company had nearly lost its way. Now it was stronger than ever. And this time, he would never let it slip again. Jonathan's interview sent shockwaves through the business world. His honesty, his willingness to expose his company's failures, and his commitment to real change earned widespread respect. But his work wasn't finished yet. Fixing customer service was only part of the solution. The real test was sustaining the change. Jonathan knew that policies and training could only do so much. For Reynolds Fashion to thrive long-term, the company needed a cultural shift that would outlive any single CEO or initiative. He implemented 3 key strategies to ensure the transformation wasn't just temporary. Leadership accountability. Every regional manager and store manager now had to spend 1 full day per month working as a frontline employee. They wouldn't just oversee stores from an office. They would experience customer interactions firsthand. Customer-driven bonuses. Instead of only rewarding stores for hitting sales targets, Reynolds Fashion introduced a customer experience score. Mystery shopper reviews, online feedback, and in-store surveys would directly impact employee bonuses. An open-door policy. For customers, Jonathan launched an initiative called Voice of the Customer. Any customer could now submit feedback directly to corporate leadership, including Jonathan himself. These weren't just policies. They were safeguards. If employees and managers ever started slipping back into old habits, the system itself would correct them. Several months after his undercover experience, Jonathan visited one of his stores, not as a CEO, not in disguise, but as himself. This time, the experience was completely different. Employees greeted him warmly, not because he was the boss, but because that was now the standard. Customers looked happy, engaged, and respected. The energy in the store was positive, professional, and welcoming. As he walked toward the exit, an employee, one who had once ignored him during his undercover visit, approached. "Mr. Reynolds," she said nervously, "I just wanted to say, I was one of the employees who failed you before. I didn't take my job seriously back then. But now, I love what we do here. Thank you for giving us a second chance." Jonathan smiled. This was why he fought for change. It wasn't just about profits. It wasn't just about reputation. It was about building something meaningful, something that would last. Months had passed since Jonathan Reynolds took one of the biggest risks of his career, going undercover to expose the truth about his own company. What started as a shocking discovery had turned into a complete transformation of Reynolds Fashion. The results spoke for themselves. Customer satisfaction had soared. The negative reviews that once plagued the company had been replaced by glowing recommendations. Sales had increased. Customers who once avoided Reynolds Fashion now returned, bringing their friends and family. Employee morale had improved. Staff who once felt unappreciated now took pride in their work. The toxic culture of indifference had been replaced by a shared commitment to excellence. But for Jonathan, this was about more than just numbers. Unlike before, when he managed from behind a desk, Jonathan now made regular, unannounced visits to his stores. Not to inspect, not to intimidate, but to listen. He would walk in as himself, shake hands with employees, chat with customers, and make sure the heart of his company remained strong. One afternoon, during one of these visits, he overheard a customer say something that truly validated his efforts. "You know, I used to hate shopping here," the woman said to a friend. "The employees never cared. But now, it's completely different. They actually treat you like a person. I love coming here again." Jonathan didn't interrupt. He didn't introduce himself. He just smiled, knowing that his company had found its way back. Before leaving the store, Jonathan turned to one of his managers. "There's something I want every employee to understand," he said. "What's that, sir?" Jonathan looked around the store. The busy aisles, the happy customers, the engaged employees, and then back at the manager. Businesses don't fail because of bad numbers. They fail because they forget why they exist. We're not just here to sell clothes. We're here to serve people. The manager nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Jonathan had almost lost his company to neglect, to complacency, to leaders who valued profit over people. But he had turned it around. Not with numbers, not with punishments, but by remembering what truly matters. And this time, he would never let Reynolds Fashion forget again.